Hi, Becca. It's so good to see you.
Hi, Whitney. Thank you for your work here on CCF. I just really enjoyed the interviews, the journeys, the tales of despair and joy, and ultimately
Hmm.
often deliverance. Encourages me. It feels good to have company on this road.
Yeah, completely. Well, it's my pleasure to do this and also to talk to you today. I'm really excited about this. I'd love if you'd start with a quick introduction of who you are, and then we can get to your story. I'm really looking forward to it.
My name is Becca Curtis, and I live here in Southern California. My beginnings in this church are through my mom's grandparents
Mhm.
when they were homesteading in New Mexico, and then my dad's parents, my grandparents, when they were homesteading in North Dakota. That's how I ended up in this religion. I'd like to just share that I had so much good in spite of this sect. And I feel like my parents truly loved God. They were sincere. They loved reading their Bibles. And I feel like most of us kids, we also love reading our Bibles. And so I feel like there are gifts that have been given. A couple stories on the positive. I was thinking about growing up. I remember we had just moved from San Diego to Bakersfield. Maybe I should just mention I had three older brothers and two sisters. So my brothers were grown and gone, but we had just moved to Bakersfield. And a few weeks after we moved there, I would have been 12, my dad began having night sweats and was diagnosed with Hodgkin's. And so it was a real scary time for our family. And these new friends in the valley there in Bakersfield area, they just pitched in and helped us and were so loving to us. One thing I
Mhm.
remember is my parents were driving up to Stanford for treatment from Bakersfield, which is 4 or 5 hours. They were up there during the week and came home on the weekends. And I remember Betty Grant and Mary Stearns drove a motor home all the way up to Stanford, so my parents had a place to stay. So there's little things, actually, those are big things, that there was love and there were godly people, and there are godly people in this religion. So I want to share the kindness and the love in spite of the religion. I think a lot of us here understand that there were many cultic traits to this religion. I didn't see it all when I was in it. I think the first time I might have heard it and really understood it was last year. We were at a Restore conference in Arizona, and there was a couple who came out of this way, and there were some people asking why we were there, and I think he brought it up. I can't remember if they asked him if it was a cult or if he brought it up. And when I heard that word cult, I kind of reeled. I was standing there, and in my mind, I think I automatically wanted to say, no, no, it can't be
Mhm.
that extreme. But and
Yeah.
looking at it, there were a lot of traits that were very damaging and worked against the power of God, where
Mm.
there could have been a lot more power in showing his love and his grace. We were told there were no rules and they were unwritten, but we all understood what they were. Like if I had walked into a morning meeting, even with just pants, something that we know that's not biblical or a godly requirement. But if I had done that, I definitely feel like within a week or two, I would have been asked not to take part of the emblems. I don't know how far it would have gone. I never tested it. I never thought about it when I was in the way. But there are many
Yeah.
things that we thought we had choice, and we thought we were adults with rational thinking, but there was part of my brain, at least, that was completely unplugged because of the understood requirements of this religion. I've thought a lot of the ministry. I asked my sister, I have a sister that's 2 years older than I, and I asked for permission, asked her if she was comfortable with me sharing. She was in the ministry for 14 years here in California and Montana and Wyoming. And ultimately in 2002, she had a mental breakdown. And we feel like the fact that she had a complete break was related to the extremeness of the requirements. We felt it being just in like civilians in this way. But I
Mhm.
think the ministers were under extreme duress. Talked to her a little bit about it. She shared a story that I kind of feel at least illustrates at least what some of the sisters experienced. She had been in the work a year or two, and she was at preps, and there it was work day, and a sister worker called her in and said, oh, by the way, she was wearing a dress that was probably about an inch above the top of her shoes. But the sister called her in and said, I've heard you're not wearing nylons with your socks and tennis shoes at work day. And Loretta knew that from then on, she needed to wear nylons with her socks and shoes and her dress that was an inch above her shoes. This last weekend, we laughed about it. But what's not funny is at that time, she swallowed it. And we all swallowed it. And maybe the older sister had swallowed it. Maybe she was damaged herself from those cultic type requirements. And I'm going to just share that there are a lot of ministers that now I see were very false. But at the time, I love them. I believed what they portrayed. But anyway, she mentioned that Eldon Tenniswood, every year at the workers' meeting, he would mention that story of the farmer having people kind of do an internship on his turnip farm. And he would ask them to plant the turnips root side up. And the guys that would come in, they knew about farming, they knew better. They would plant it root side down, but it was the ones that planted it root side up, they got the job. And it's almost directly telling you, don't think. And it wasn't just in the ministry, but the pressures there. Just don't think. Don't use your rational, God given mind and follow what a man says. It's not saying follow what God says. It says, he was saying you need to follow what we tell you to do. So anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about that. It's not unique. I've heard other stories of the ministers that have gone through very unhealthy coping skills to make it, and quite a few have had big mental obstacles to get mentally healthy again. So my mom, she had spent 2 years in the ministry before she married my dad, and my mom and dad were not worker worshipers. They had a lot of respect and they were very hospitable and very supportive. But it could have been from my mom's experience that she would say no sometimes. It almost sometimes embarrassed me. I remember a worker wanting to come and give all the details of the revelations and in Revelations. And it was just kind of over the top. And my mom just said, no, our home's not open to that. And just different things. I think she maybe had a balance because she saw the inside of it. She still believed in this way, just like I did. And then my own journey out of this sect, interestingly, in June of 2022, I had two sisters staying with me. I remember them coming out from the bedroom and just sharing with me that Dean Brewer was dead, or he had passed away, was usually the words we used. And one of the sisters said something that I think it's what I thought also is, oh, he was probably weary. He had been at convention. He was probably tired. That's probably why he stopped at the motel. And that's what I thought too. But that was June of 2022. And then I rolled along, continued going. I was happy. Happy. I felt like I had a happiness to it. Looking back, I see a lot of the maybe avoidance I had. It maybe wasn't. I knew when a worker would stand up and speak about Rebecca, my namesake, and the servants giving her jewels and to show his master's wealth. I knew that jewelry wasn't ungodly. Anyway, so March of 2023, I was in the same boat, I think, as most of you. I remember after hearing what had happened with Dean and kind of knowing it had been so long since he passed away. So most likely people knew about it way before March of 2023. I think it's been discussed that was so. I know I couldn't sleep well for a night or two. And I think that was the whole community was just so we felt so betrayed. I didn't like Dean necessarily. He was in Montana when my sister lived there. I don't think he was a likable person, but I never thought he was evil. I never saw that. And so then just to have it be revealed how he misused people's funds, the money that a lot of people gave up that they probably didn't even have. And then the hospitality they had offered him where he formed his connections to the victims. It showed how the Spirit hadn't led them to choose him as the overseer. That there's no way that God would put a man like that in charge. And then I don't have to retell this story, but maybe I'll just kind of go through briefly is I think it was shocking to see, and this is just the area I know, the West Coast, men who I see now as evil, as an opinion, Dan Lottie, Mark Huddle, Scott Rosher, who unfortunately that's who I professed through, and Harold Bennett and Leslie White in Colorado. And then we heard further on Ira Hobbs. These are all just overseers and just the ones we know about. It just seemed like the filth went to the top. It was very shocking for all of us. I did find help in reading accounts of people. It felt good to hear voices that had been silenced. It took quite a few days to read My Higher Power is Gracious, and realizing I had to take time even to read it, and a little girl had to live it. I don't know how many tears that have been cried, the laments that have been given from this, from our people. Like it or not, these are our people. We're part of that. And I appreciated Steve Blomberg, I believe it is. I've never met him, but he wrote a long blog, and it was very unbiased, very factual, and just cruelty to someone that needed medical help. And they had the money and they refused him care. He had nowhere to go after giving his life for all those years. It's appalling. So this is very negative, but the church has a lot of blackness. So anyway, reading some of those stories, Michael Havitt, understanding why Robert Corfield was moved to Montana, that beautiful little boy, and just his courage and speaking. I love him. I have never met him. And then my twin sister, she married a Calgarian, and they moved to Calgary. They lived there for 5 years, right in that time where Willis Prop was doing the business dealings, had the name, and people were questioning and excommunicated. And I had the privilege of hearing those recordings. I'm so glad they were made, because it's undeniable. You're hearing the voices of these friends. I kept thinking of my parents, hardworking couple, saying, we've been at work all day. Can we call you tomorrow? And this older brother saying, no. It was helpful, because I don't know if I would have believed it. It was too much to believe, I think, because this was our love. For me, it was my whole community. I had no community outside of this. I think the victims and those that have come forward and told their story, then hearing the Bainbridge's story, understanding what had happened with Bernard and Wilma Bone. That was right in Gilroy, and then they lived in Bakersfield. They went to my parents' meeting. I didn't know. I remember that year I was actually at Walla Walla when I saw them, and I was talking to him, and a brother worker came up, and it was like he was running interference, and I didn't know what it was going on, but I don't think he wanted me talking to Bernard or Wilma. So little memories like that, it makes me very sorry for their hurt, but I'm so thankful they've spoken up, because otherwise the posturing, the cover up would have worked for me. So that was March of 23. I believed it would turn around. It was helpful. Is it Michael and Lily Ford? They began asking questions about in the New Testament and the New Testament church, comparing it to what was actually being lived out and taught in our religion. And so I spent that time. I read, of course, from Matthew through, I didn't read Revelations, but through Jude, and just digging in and seeing that what we were taught, it wasn't so. And thank goodness for Cherie Prop and her history. She's shared with us exquisite details of, we know that there was an earthly origin. And there was a time between March and July where I felt that if they would just come forward and say, yeah, there was a William Irvine, and these abuses were wrong, and our behavior was wrong, and our lack of involving the church to handle church dealings, that was wrong. I would have, at that time, I would have loved to have continued, especially at Sunday morning meetings. I don't know if I had any real affection for gospel meeting, but I remember feeling I could not do without the Sunday morning meeting, because I felt like there was no other format like that. And it was precious to me. I met just a quarter mile from here. Ironically, I met at the home of Ray Hoffman's brother, and I can't speak highly enough of them. They're a beautiful couple, and they were so welcoming. And I have a brother that says this, he calls them little people, and it's true. They're just little people. They're beautiful. humble people. So anyway,
Mm.
so from March to July, I really wanted them to fix it. And
Yeah.
I was just cheering like with Robin Hill,
Yeah.
her advocacy. I love her. And I just love the godliness of her being willing to stand up and speak up. And then Mark Simmons, when he spoke at convention, I heard a recording. And I was just, yay, somebody's speaking the truth. Oh, this is going to work, is what I
Mm.
thought. And then
Yeah.
I heard a recording of Dan McLeod just being honest. I believe it was a Saturday when they were ready to test the media. I'm not sure. But
Mm.
I really felt like those voices would work. And
Mm.
as that went on, and we heard of the friends like the Nelsons and the Pattons,
Mm.
them trying to get the church back on the rails. As I saw no response to that by July, I knew that they'd known for years and years and years. That was
Mhm.
part of the problem that I didn't understand, is I thought they just were learning about these issues. But by July, I no longer believed in the church. I still valued my Sunday morning meeting, and I thought, well, I'll just keep going. My twin sister and her husband had left actually before the Dean Brewer event blew open. In May, I went to Button Willow Convention. It was the most tearful convention I've ever been to for myself. And I didn't really know why I was crying. I don't think I think I practiced a
Mm.
lot of avoidance in my journey out. I
Mhm.
remember a good friend, Julie Romy, standing up at testimony, and she says, I'm so angry. And it was good for me because I realized, yeah, we're angry. And it helped to understand some of where those tears were coming from. I kind of thought it was because my twin sister and husband weren't there. That's kind of what I attributed my grief to. And then I remember Saturday night when they tested the meeting, and this poor man that some of the friends had brought stood up, and I couldn't believe it. They were bringing people in when they hadn't fixed it. That was how I felt
Yeah.
at that time. And so it was helpful probably to be there for me to learn and understand that God was saying, this isn't my church. These people, there may be people here that are part of my church, but my church is much bigger. And my love is much bigger than this. And so there was that indecisive path I took. I believe my last meeting was October.
Mhm.
Every Sunday morning, I would just get a stomach ache. I couldn't go. And I knew I just needed to write a letter. So in January of 2024, I wrote an email that sat in my inbox for a couple of weeks. And I still remember trying to hit send. And it was the hardest thing
Yeah.
I've ever done. It was to my
Mhm.
brother who still attends, and Courtney Blanchard, who is the sister and my elder. And just, I knew that when I pushed that button, that there would be ties that would be broken. And I
Mhm.
loved Courtney. We saw her at
Mhm.
preps at Button Willow. These were my friends. And so
Yeah.
anyway, that's my story of my path out. The week after let's see, that was the 18th of January. It's interesting how I could remember that. I probably always will. But the 25th of January, I was looking at that. I work as a radiation therapist, so I treat cancer patients. And this patient, he was finishing, and he gave me this notebook. Usually they give you like a gift card for coffee, but it says,
Huh.
my grace is sufficient for you. And then he gave
Mm.
me a pen that says, always pray, never give up, from Luke 18. And
Uh-huh.
it was beautiful. It was,
Mm.
I needed it. I felt like it was from God. This patient had a beautiful spirit. We have cameras so we can tell when the next patient's there. And there was this real cantankerous attorney that was being treated. And I would see this patient that gave me that tablet out there talking to him. Usually you saw everybody sit a long ways away from this man because he was kind of grumpy.
Mhm.
He
Mhm.
ended up being very sweet underneath, but this man had a beautiful spirit. And so he really encouraged me, just giving me that pen and that tablet. And a couple days after that, another patient had friends come in, and they wanted a little tour. And they came by in the evening when everybody was gone. I was just finishing up some things. I saw them in the cameras, and I brought them back for this tour. And we stood there, and they asked, can we pray? And we stood in
Mhm.
a circle holding hands while they prayed for us. for the patients who would be coming in, and I just cried because I was seeing something that I already knew. I already knew that God was not just in this little bitty, unheard of religion, but I just felt like God was encouraging me during a time. I think we all know it was just it's grief to leave. It's liberty, but it's grief. So I appreciate
Yeah.
the encouragement that God gave me during that time, because otherwise, I think one of the words I would use for that first little while is you just feel alone, and yet you just your relationship with God does get deeper, but there is just that feeling of you don't know where you're headed next. Your church has been your whole life. I think in the very beginning, after I left, I felt like I just needed to find another church that was the right church,
Mhm.
and it was helpful to read and hear Diane Langberg on that it's not a system, and
Yeah.
we'll never have to try to defend a system again. And so there was a lot of freedom and
Yeah.
beauty and growing out of that concept and just knowing how great God is. Some of the books that were very, very helpful when I first, that January, February, March, April time, I really loved Love Matters More by Jared Bias, Diane Langberg, and then more recently, Wayne Jacobson's Finding Church and He Loves Me. Oh,
Hmm.
I'm just really learning a lot there. I
Yeah.
appreciate being drawn into the love and the grace.
Amazing. I really appreciate how you've put that all together because when you're talking about it, we've gone through these last couple years together, and the way you're talking about it, I love to be reminded of the grief. And I know that sounds strange, but I love to be reminded of the heroic effort and the courage and the grief of those years where we were learning about what was going on. And then, like, you talk about the journey towards that liberty, like them going together. I think that's a really incredible way to put that they're together.
Yeah, I think one of the things I found most spiritual has been like looking at the stars. Science really lifts my heart toward God because we just see all his laws, like the laws of gravity and energy. And I don't know if you remember when those first photos came out from the new telescope, and they had this
Mhm.
picture, and it was the size of the moon. And I know I posted it, but I like to think about that. This tiny little area of the sky, the size of the moon, had 400 galaxies, just
Mhm.
like ours, just in
Mhm.
that tiny spot. And
Yeah.
it's relevant to me because in understanding God's love and what his church is, his people, his creation that he loves, we know his work is massive. It's infinite. And
Uh-huh.
so it makes sense that all around me, all these billions of people on this earth, that there are people that are in fellowship with God, in
Mhm.
complete fellowship with God. And I
Mhm.
find joy in that, of just the infinite immenseness. Infinite, that's a new
Mhm.
word. But the infinite immenseness of God's love and
Yeah.
his plan for us. Like, I love to think about that. When he first even created the earth, it was, no form, no void, and his spirit moved. His spirit's enough. He can fill our hearts and our lives with that so that we can show love. We know how to feed others and clothe them, and the things that he wants to see in us, as far as, well, God is love. It's in the Bible. It
Mm.
says that, and it's true. It's
Yeah.
perfectly demonstrated through our Father and through Jesus. I feel like lately, my growth area is slow, or I mean, I know it's slow, but just of learning God's grace, God's love, that the certainness of that power. Yeah.
It's immense. I like that word. I just appreciate you talking about all this, talking about like science and the galaxies and all of that. It's just so heart lifting for me to think about all of that. And I experience the same thing where looking at the stars is one of the most spiritual things. I'm glad you brought that into the conversation because it's so easy to be so consumed by grief and then to realize that the broadness and the depth of his love is really immense.
Right, right. And it's pure, like creation's pure. Man hasn't been able to pollute it. It's almost like a direct language from God to us, is how I feel.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
cool.
There's a verse. Let me see if I can find it. Isaiah 51 and 11. I don't have a whole lot more to share. I'm a pretty
Sure.
simple person and not very articulate, but there it is.
Oh, it's been beautiful.
Anyway, I appreciate being able to share here. I'm looking forward to hearing
Mm,
from others. I appreciate the
mm,
community again here. One memory I was having of there was a little CCF Zoom right after I left, and I was pretty like we've talked about. I was heartbroken, but I think I was asking, "How do you find a church?" or something like that. And Carolus, I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, but he was so reassuring about how he and his wife, the first time they entered a church building, they were just shaking, and that's how I
mhm,
felt. And it was just so
mhm.
good to hear that's how they felt too. And
Yeah.
so the first time I ever went into a false church, it's a very
Mm,
progressive church here in San Bernardino. It was an Easter service. It was
mm,
beautiful. It was
mhm,
beautiful. I think my favorite thing is the singing because you just are able to
mhm,
sing. There's no agenda. There's just harmony and worship.
mhm, mhm.
Anyway, this morning on my Bible app, this verse came up, and I thought it was kind of perfect. It's Isaiah 51 and 11, and the only printed Bible I have is King James, so mine apologies.
Uh-huh.
But it says, "Therefore the redeemed of the Lord shall return, and come with singing unto Zion, and everlasting joy shall be upon their head. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and mourning shall flee away." And I'm thankful for that promise that I understand those that are still in the church. I understand that you also follow God. I understand that. But I also understand the largeness of the Lord's fellowship. It's huge. And I'm
Mm,
thankful that though there's been sorrow and mourning, that we have been brought into joy. And I have confidence that that will increase until we enter into eternity, the other infinite part
yeah,
of God's
right.
love. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Oh man, that's such a good way to end this. It kind of ties together all that you've been talking about of mourning being turned to joy. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's a good promise,
Mm,
and it's true. There's so many things
mhm.
that haven't been true, but it's true.
Yeah. Oh man, thank you, Becca. It's
Thank
been
you.
such a pleasure.
Thanks for your ministry, Whitney, and have a
Oh,
beautiful day.
it's my pleasure. Good to
All
talk
right.
to you,
Take care.
Becca.
Bye.
Take care.